The crimson mark across Faith Caldwell's cheek burned brighter than usual as the townsfolk's whispers followed her down the dusty main street of Willits, California, the birthmark that had branded her an outcast since the day she'd drawn her first breath. Faith kept her head high despite the stairs boring into her back. It was 1878, and superstition still held as much power in this frontier town as law or gospel. She'd learned long ago that hiding behind her honey-brown hair only confirmed what people already believed, that she was ashamed of the devil's mark she bore. "Morning, Miss Caldwell," called Mr. Peterson from the general store's porch, his greeting polite but distant, the same way most folks in Willits addressed her with carefully measured courtesy that never quite reached their eyes. "Good morning," Faith replied, adjusting the basket on her arm. At 22 years old, she'd had plenty of time to grow accustomed to being Willits' curiosity, the unmarried daughter of the late Dr. Caldwell, who'd inherited not only his modest house but his outsider status as well. The basket contained herbs she'd gathered at dawn, echinacea, yarrow, and willow bark remedies her father had taught her to prepare. Though many in town whispered about witchcraft when they fell ill, they still appeared at her door seeking the healing tinctures and poultices that the Newtown doctor, with his fancy Eastern education, couldn't provide. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Winters hissed to her companion as Faith passed. The Harrington Ranch hired a new foreman, some rough sort from Texas, they say. Faith pretended not to hear, though news traveled faster than wildfire in Willits. The Harrington spread was the largest in the county, and any change there affected everyone. She continued toward home, her small cottage sitting on the outskirts of town where the pines began their march up into the mountains. The late summer air carried the scent of dust and pine, a familiar comfort after another morning of enduring glances that slid away from her birthmark, a vivid red splash across her left cheek that resembled, according to town legend, the imprint of the devil's fingers. As Faith approached her gate, the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. A rider approached from the direction of the Harrington Ranch, the horse's powerful strides eating up the distance between them. The stranger sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning sun. He slowed his mount as he neared, and Faith's breath caught. She'd never seen him before she would have remembered. His face was tanned and weathered beneath the shadow of his hat, with eyes the color of a summer storm and a jawline that could have been carved from granite. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His gaze moved across her face without faltering when it reached her birthmark. "I'm looking for the healer. They said in town I might find them out this way." Faith clutched her basket tighter. "I'm Faith Caldwell. I provide remedies, though I wouldn't call myself a healer." "Isaiah Ironwood," he replied, swinging down from the saddle. His movement was fluid despite his tall frame. "New foreman at Harrington's. Got a man with a bad gash needs stitching, and the doctor in town is away on a call." He stood before her now, and Faith found herself looking up to meet his eyes. Most men in town averted their gaze when speaking to her, but Isaiah Ironwood looked directly at her, his expression revealing nothing but calm assessment. "I can help," she said, opening her gate. "Let me gather my supplies," he nodded, leading his horse through the gate and tethering it to the post. "Thank you, Miss Caldwell. Mr. Harrington speaks highly of your skills." Faith's eyebrows rose in surprise. Old man Harrington was not known for compliments, especially not toward the woman much of the town suspected of being touched by darkness. Inside her cottage, Faith gathered clean cloths, her father's medical kit with surgical needles and catgut, and bottles of alcohol and witch hazel. When she returned to the porch, Isaiah was examining her garden with interest. "Quite the collection you've got here," he observed, gesturing to the neat rows of medicinal herbs. "My grandmother was a curandera, a healer back in Texas. She grew many of these same plants." "Your grandmother was a healer?" Faith asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Most men dismissed women's healing knowledge as folklore or worse. A smile touched Isaiah's lips, transforming his severe features. "Half Mexican, half Comanche. Taught me more about plants and healing than any doctor I've met since." He looked back at her garden. "You've got a good setup here." Faith felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. It had been years since anyone had spoken about her work with genuine interest rather than veiled suspicion. "We should go," she said, covering her unexpected feelings with practicality. Your injured man needs attention. Isaiah nodded, untying his horse. Can you ride, Miss Caldwell? It would be faster than walking to the ranch. Faith hesitated, then nodded. I can. With surprising gentleness, Isaiah's large hands encircled her waist as he lifted her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Faith's back was pressed against his chest, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing and caught the scent of leather, horses, and something clean and masculine that was uniquely him. Hold tight, he murmured, his voice close to her ear, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine before the horse lurched forward. As they rode toward the Harrington ranch, Faith was acutely aware of two things: the steady beat of Isaiah's heart against her back and the realization that for the first time in her adult life, a man had truly looked at her, and hadn't seemed to see the devil's mark at all. The injured ranch hand was a young man named Billy, no more than 19, with a deep cut along his forearm from a broken fence wire. Faith worked efficiently, cleaning the wound while Isaiah held the boy steady. Billy's eyes kept darting to Faith's birthmark, but he said nothing, gritting his teeth as she began to stitch the wound closed. You've got a gentle touch, Miss Caldwell, Isaiah observed as she tied off the final stitch. Steadier hands than most doctors I've seen. Faith felt color rise to her cheeks. My father was a doctor, he taught me well. Dr. Caldwell, Isaiah nodded. I heard about him in town, sounds like he was respected. By some, Faith replied carefully, wrapping a clean bandage around Billy's arm. Medicine wasn't always enough to overcome prejudice. Isaiah's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing as she finished her work and gave Billy instructions on keeping the wound clean. When they stepped outside the bunkhouse, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. I should get you back to town, Isaiah said, but made no move toward his horse. Instead, he stood watching her with those intent gray eyes. Unless you'd care to stay for supper, Mrs. Harrington always makes enough to feed an army. Faith blinked in surprise. That's very kind, but I should return home before dark. Of course. Isaiah nodded, but there was something in his expression that made Faith wonder if he was disappointed. I'll escort you back. The ride home was quieter, both of them lost in thought. When they reached Faith's cottage, the setting sun had painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Isaiah dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. Thank you for your help today, Miss Caldwell. It was nothing, Faith replied, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his gaze. Anyone would have done the same? No, he said softly, not anyone. Faith looked up then, searching his face for the mockery or pity she was accustomed to finding. She saw neither. Good evening, Mr. Ironwood. Isaiah, he corrected. And I suspect we'll be seeing more of each other, Faith Caldwell. Ranching is dangerous work, after all. There was a hint of a smile in his voice that made her heart beat faster. He mounted his horse with easy grace, touched the brim of his hat, and rode away, leaving Faith standing at her gate with the strange sensation that something fundamental had shifted in her carefully ordered world. Over the next several weeks, Isaiah Ironwood found numerous reasons to visit Faith's cottage. A ranch hand with a sprained ankle, another with a persistent cough. His own horse, which he claimed needed a particular herb that only grew near Faith's property. Each time he would linger, asking questions about her garden or sharing stories of his grandmother's healing practices. Faith found herself looking forward to his visits, to the way he spoke to her as if she were simply a woman with valuable skills rather than a marked outcast. Autumn had begun to paint the surrounding hills with gold and crimson when Isaiah arrived one evening with no apparent pretext. Faith was hanging herbs to dry on her porch when his familiar figure appeared on the path. Mr. Ironwood, she called, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. No injuries today, just one, he replied, dismounting and approaching her gate. Mrs. Harrington's making apple pies for tomorrow's harvest celebration, and I thought you might like to join us. Faith's hands stilled on the bundles of herbs. The harvest celebration at the Harrington ranch. Yes, madam. His expression remained neutral, but there was a tension in his shoulders that betrayed his concern about her answer. Faith hadn't attended a town gathering since her father's funeral 3 years prior. The whispers and stares had become too much to bear, and she'd found it easier to keep to herself. But the thought of spending an afternoon in Isaiah's company was tempting. "I'm not sure I'd be welcome," she said carefully. Isaiah's jaw tightened. "You'd be there as my guest." "Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." The protective edge in his voice sent warmth spreading through her. "That's very kind, but it's not kindness, Faith." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I've wanted to speak with you about something, and tomorrow seemed like a good opportunity." Faith's heart hammered against her ribs. "What did you want to discuss?" Isaiah ran a hand through his dark hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I'd rather wait until tomorrow. Will you come?" She studied his face, searching for any hint of deception or cruelty. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Yes, I'll come." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "I'll fetch you at noon, then." As he rode away, Faith pressed her hand to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. No matter how genuine Isaiah seemed, years of experience had taught her to be wary. Men had pretended interest before, usually as part of some cruel joke or bet. Yet something about Isaiah Ironwood felt different, solid and true, like the mountains that framed the valley. That night, Faith stood before her small mirror, examining the birthmark that had defined her life. The red stain across her left cheek had neither faded nor spread since birth. In the right light, it did indeed resemble a handprint, fingers stretching toward her temple. The devil's touch, the townspeople called it. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and Faith had often wondered if the mark was somehow punishment for that loss. Her father, a man of science, had explained it as nothing more than a concentration of blood vessels beneath the skin, but even he couldn't prevent the rumors that swirled around his daughter. With a sigh, Faith turned away from the mirror. Tomorrow she would venture back into the world that had rejected her, and for the first time in years, she found herself hoping for acceptance. The Harrington Ranch was transformed for the harvest celebration. Trestle tables laden with food stretched across the yard, and bales of hay had been arranged for seating. Lanterns hung from tree branches, waiting for evening to fall, and a small group of musicians tuned their instruments on the porch. Faith felt the stares as Isaiah helped her down from his horse. Her simple blue dress was the finest she owned, and she'd spent extra time with her hair, though nothing could hide the mark on her face. Isaiah's hand at the small of her back was warm and reassuring as he guided her through the crowd. "Miss Caldwell," Mrs. Harrington greeted her with a stiff nod. Though not openly hostile, the ranch owner's wife had always kept her distance from Faith. "How nice of you to join us." "Thank you for having me," Faith replied politely. "Isaiah speaks very highly of your medical skills, Mrs. Harrington continued, her eyes flicking to the birthmark before settling somewhere over Faith's shoulder. "We're grateful for your assistance with our ranch hands." Isaiah's hand pressed gently at Faith's back. "Mrs. Harrington's apple pie is famous throughout the county. You must try some later." The older woman seemed to relax slightly. "Yes, do. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must see to the other guests." As Mrs. Harrington moved away, Faith released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That wasn't as terrible as I expected," Isaiah chuckled. "Mrs. Harrington's bark is worse than her bite. Come, let me introduce you to some of the men you've patched up. They've been asking about you." To Faith's surprise, many of the ranch hands greeted her warmly, expressing genuine gratitude for her medical assistance. Several of their wives offered shy smiles and invited her to join them at their table. It was more acceptance than Faith had experienced in years, and she knew it was largely due to Isaiah's influence. As the afternoon progressed, Faith began to relax. The music started, and children played games in the open space between the buildings. Isaiah remained close, bringing her food and introducing her to those she didn't know. His attentiveness didn't go unnoticed. Faith caught several knowing glances exchanged between the ranch wives. "You're causing quite a stir, Mr. Ironwood," Faith murmured as they walked toward the apple orchard, seeking a moment of quiet. "Am I?" he replied, his eyes twinkling, "and here I thought I was being subtle." Faith felt her cheeks warm. "Your attention is noticeable." They stopped beneath an apple tree heavy with fruit, the sounds of the celebration muted by distance. Isaiah turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Faith, I need to tell you something." Her heart lurched. Here it comes, she thought. The joke, the explanation that it had all been a misunderstanding or a wager among the ranch hands. I'm leaving Willits. Of all the things she'd expected, this wasn't one of them. Faith felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. Leaving, she repeated, her voice small. Isaiah nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. I've been offered land of my own, in Northern California near the Oregon border, good grazing land with a stream running through it and forest for timber. I see. Faith struggled to keep her expression neutral to hide the crushing disappointment. That's a fine opportunity. It is. He took a step closer, but I don't want to go alone. Faith's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that from the moment I saw you, standing at your gate with your basket of herbs and your head held high despite how this town treats you, I knew you were someone special. His voice was low and intense. I'm asking if you'd consider coming with me, as my wife. Faith stared at him, searching for any sign that he was less than sincere. You can't be serious, you barely know me. I know enough, he said firmly. I know you're intelligent and skilled. I know you're kind even to those who don't deserve it. I know you're brave, facing this town every day with dignity. His hand rose, hesitating near her cheek before dropping back to his side, and I know I want to spend my life getting to know the rest. And this. Faith touched her birthmark, her voice breaking slightly. The devil's touch doesn't trouble you. Something flashed in Isaiah's eyes, not disgust or pity, but a fierce protectiveness that took her breath away. May I? He asked softly, raising his hand again. Faith nodded, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. Gently, Isaiah's fingertips touched the edge of her birthmark, tracing its outline with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. This isn't the devil's touch, he murmured, his eyes holding hers. If anything, it's heaven sent a mark of how special you are, how different from the narrow-minded folk who fear what they don't understand. His thumb brushed lightly over the center of the mark. It's beautiful, Faith. You're beautiful. And then, with infinite care, Isaiah lowered his head and pressed his lips to the crimson stain on her cheek. The kiss was soft, reverent, and Faith felt something inside her breaking open, years of shame and isolation crumbling beneath this simple act of acceptance. When he pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. Isaiah wiped them away with his thumb. I don't expect an answer today, he said gently. But I leave in 2 weeks. Think about it. Faith knew she should be cautious, should take time to consider such a life-altering decision. But looking into Isaiah's eyes, she saw a future she'd never dared to imagine, a life where she was valued and loved, not in spite of her differences, but because of them. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. The smile that broke across Isaiah's face was radiant. He gathered her hands in his, bringing them to his lips. I promise you won't regret it. As the sun began to set over the Harrington ranch, painting the sky in the same crimson hue as Faith's birthmark, she found herself believing for the first time that perhaps her mark wasn't a curse after all. Perhaps, as Isaiah said, it was heaven sent leading her to this moment, this man, and a future brighter than any she'd dared to dream. The wedding took place a week later, a simple ceremony in Faith's garden with Mr. Harrington officiating and a handful of ranch hands as witnesses. Mrs. Harrington had surprised Faith with a basket of preserves and linens as a wedding gift, and even a few townsfolk had cautiously offered congratulations when word spread. Faith wore a dress of pale ivory that had belonged to her mother, with wildflowers in her hair. She made no attempt to hide her birthmark, and when Isaiah recited his vows, his eyes never left hers, his gaze filled with such tenderness that Faith felt truly beautiful for the first time in her life. I, Isaiah Ironwood, take you, Faith Caldwell, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the small gathering. I promise to cherish and protect you all the days of my life, to honor your wisdom and strength, and to love you completely exactly as you are. When he kissed her, his lips brushing first against her birthmark before finding her mouth, there were murmurs of approval from the assembled guests. Faith heard Mrs. Peterson whisper to her husband, "Well, he really does love her," and for once the comment held no malice. The journey north began the following day. Faith's possessions were few: her father's medical books and instruments, her collection of dried herbs and tinctures, some clothes, and a small wooden box containing her mother's locket and her father's pocket watch. Everything fit into a trunk that Isaiah secured to the back of a sturdy wagon pulled by two reliable horses. "Are you ready?" Isaiah asked as Faith stood on the porch of the cottage that had been her home for all her 22 years. Faith took a deep breath, looking at the small house with its herb garden and the view of the mountains beyond. For all its familiar comforts, this place had also been her prison, defined by the whispers and stares of those who feared her birthmark. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm ready." The journey to their new home would take nearly 2 weeks. Each night, they made camp beneath the stars, and Faith discovered the joy of falling asleep in Isaiah's arms, her head resting against his chest as he told her stories of his travels across the West. During the days, they spoke of their plans for the ranch, the cattle they would raise, the vegetable garden Faith would plant, the possibility of children someday. "We'll need a proper house," Isaiah mused one evening as they sat by the campfire, the wagon a silent sentinel beside them. "Nothing fancy at first, but something that can grow with us over time." Faith smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I've never lived anywhere but that little cottage. The idea of building something new, something ours, is wonderful." Isaiah's arm tightened around her. "Our neighbors will be far more scattered than in Willits, no one dropping by to gossip or judge. And no patients coming to my door at all hours," Faith added, then paused. "Though I'll miss helping people, it gave me purpose." Isaiah turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the firelight. "The nearest doctor is in the town of Ashland, a good day's ride from our land. I reckon folks in the area would welcome someone with your skills." Hope fluttered in Faith's chest. "You wouldn't mind if I continued practicing medicine?" "Mind?" Isaiah shook his head, looking genuinely puzzled. "Faith, your healing knowledge is part of who you are. I'd never ask you to set that aside." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Besides, my grandmother always said a healer's gift shouldn't be wasted. She'd have liked you." Faith leaned forward and kissed him, overcome with gratitude for this man who saw and valued all of her. The landscape changed as they traveled northward. The golden hills of Central California gave way to denser forests and higher mountains. The air grew cooler, with a hint of pine and the first whispers of autumn. When they finally crested a ridge and Isaiah pointed to the valley below, Faith's breath caught in her throat. "That's it," he said, pride evident in his voice. "That's our land." Spread before them was a verdant valley cradled between forested hills. A silver ribbon of a stream curved through meadows dotted with wildflowers. On one side, an open area of grassland stretched toward distant mountains. On the other, the forest provided a natural windbreak and source of timber. "It's beautiful," Faith whispered. Isaiah squeezed her hand. "Not as beautiful as you, but it'll do." The property included a small, rough cabin built by the previous owner, a trapper who had decided to move further into the wilderness. It wasn't much, just one room with a stone fireplace and a dirt floor, but it would shelter them while they built their permanent home. That first night in their new home, after they had unloaded the wagon and arranged their few possessions, Isaiah built a fire in the hearth while Faith prepared a simple meal. Outside, the sounds of the wilderness replaced the familiar noises of town, the soft hooting of owls, the rustle of wind through pine boughs, the distant howl of a wolf. "Different from Willits," Isaiah observed, watching Faith's face in the firelight. "Peaceful," she replied. "Like we're the only two people in the world." Later, as they lay together on the bedroll spread before the fire, Isaiah traced the outline of Faith's birthmark with gentle fingers. "Do you know what this reminds me of?" he asked softly. Faith turned toward him, curious. "What?" "The shape of our valley, seen from above." His finger moved along the curve of the mark. "See, here's the stream winding through, and these lines could be the edge of the forest." He smiled. "Maybe it's not the devil's touch at all. Maybe it's a map that was leading you home all along." Faith felt tears prick her eyes at the beauty of the idea. "Isaiah Ironwood," she whispered, "you make me believe in miracles." "Not miracles," he murmured, kissing the mark gently. "Just love." And this, his lips brushed her birthmark again, "this isn't the devil's touch. It's heaven sent, a blessing that led me to you." As winter approached, Isaiah worked tirelessly to prepare their small cabin for the cold months ahead. He reinforced the walls with additional logs, covered the dirt floor with wooden planks salvaged from the wagon, and built a proper bed frame that he surprised Faith with on a crisp October evening. It's beautiful, she gasped, running her hand over the smooth wood headboard carved with intertwining vines and flowers. Figured we should have something more comfortable than that bedroll, Isaiah said with a grin. Besides, it gets mighty cold up here in winter. We'll need to stay warm. The suggestive tone in his voice made Faith blush, though after weeks as his wife, she'd grown comfortable with his affection and desire. Each day, Isaiah found some way to show her how much he treasured her, a wildflower tucked behind her ear, a lingering kiss to her birthmark before he left to work with the small herd of cattle he'd acquired, a soft word of appreciation for the home she was creating. Word of Faith's healing skills spread quickly through the scattered homesteads of the region. The first patient arrived just a month after they'd settled a logger with a badly infected hand. Faith treated him with a poultice of crushed garlic and yarrow, then gave him willow bark tea for the pain. The man departed with profuse thanks and a promise to return in a week. He did return, his hand healing well, and brought with him a neighbor whose wife was struggling with a difficult pregnancy. Soon, Faith found herself with a small but steady stream of patients seeking her remedies and medical knowledge. None of them commented on her birthmark beyond occasional curious glances, and even those seemed born more of interest than fear. "They respect you," Isaiah observed one evening after Faith had treated a rancher's young son for a persistent cough. Words getting around about the healer with the gentle hands. Faith smiled as she organized her herbs. "It's different here. People judge based on actions, not appearances." As they should. Isaiah came behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Though I still say your birthmark is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, my heaven-sent woman." As winter descended on the valley, bringing snow that transformed their land into a glittering wonderland, Faith and Isaiah settled into a rhythm of life together. Their cabin, though small, had become a warm haven. Isaiah had built sturdy shelves for Faith's medicines and books, and she had decorated the space with dried flowers and herbs hanging from the rafters. On the longest night of the year, a fierce blizzard howled around their cabin. Faith sat before the fire, sewing patches onto Isaiah's work shirt while he whittled a piece of pine wood into the shape of a small horse. "What are you making?" Faith asked, looking up from her mending. Isaiah smiled mysteriously. "You'll see, it's not ready yet." The wind rattled the shutters, and Faith felt a surge of gratitude for the solid walls and warm fire. "Do you think the cattle are all right in this storm? They're in the lean-to with plenty of hay," Isaiah assured her. "They've weathered worse." Faith nodded, returning to her sewing. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, she said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." Isaiah looked up, his hands stilling on the carving. "What's that? Our children, when we have them." Faith's voice was thoughtful. "What if they inherit my birthmark?" Isaiah set down his carving and moved to sit beside her on the bench. "Then they will be as beautiful as their mother. But the things people might say will matter not at all," Isaiah said firmly. "Our children will grow up knowing they are treasured exactly as they are. They won't face what you did in Willits because they'll have us to protect them, and because people here see with clearer eyes." He took her hand. "Besides, any child of ours will be too busy learning your healing ways and my ranching skills to worry about what others think." Faith leaned into his solid warmth. "You make everything seem so simple." "Not simple," he corrected. "Just right." He kissed the top of her head. "Now I think it's time I showed you what I've been working on these past weeks." Rising, Isaiah went to the storage chest in the corner of the cabin and removed a bundle wrapped in a piece of soft cloth. He brought it back to Faith, his expression a mixture of nervousness and pride. "It's not fancy," he warned as he placed it in her lap, "but I wanted to make something for you." Faith carefully unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a small wooden cradle, lovingly crafted with the same vine and flower pattern that adorned their bed. The wood was polished to a warm glow, and a small mattress filled with clean straw had been fitted inside. "Isaiah," Faith breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's perfect." "I thought it might be needed sooner rather than later," he said softly. Faith looked up sharply, her eyes wide. "How did you know? I wasn't certain myself until yesterday." Isaiah's expression transformed from tentative to stunned. "You mean, are you saying?" Faith nodded, her eyes filling with happy tears. "Yes, by summer's end we'll have a child. With a whoop of joy, Isaiah lifted Faith from the bench and spun her around, mindful not to hold her too tightly. When he set her down, he dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face gently against her still flat stomach. "A baby," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Faith stroked his dark hair, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "Our baby," she echoed. "Heaven sent, just like us finding each other." Isaiah rose and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs caressing her cheeks, one smooth, one marked with the crimson birthmark that had brought them together. "Heaven sent," he agreed, and kissed her as the winter storm raged harmlessly outside their sanctuary of love. Spring came to the valley in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. Faith's body changed with the season, her slender form softening as the child within her grew. Isaiah watched her with undisguised adoration, his hands often finding their way to her swelling belly as if to reassure himself that this miracle was real. Despite her pregnancy, Faith continued to tend to those who sought her healing skills. Word had spread further about the marked healer in the valley with the gentle hands and effective remedies, and sometimes patients traveled for days to reach her. Isaiah built a small lean-to adjacent to the cabin where she could see her patients without bringing them into their home. "You should rest more," he fretted one afternoon after Faith had spent hours treating a family stricken with influenza. "The baby is perfectly fine," Faith assured him, placing his hand on her belly where their child kicked vigorously. "Feels strong to me." Isaiah's worried expression melted into wonder at the movement beneath his palm. "Strong like his mother, or her father," Faith countered with a smile. They had taken to this gentle argument about whether their child would be a boy or girl, each secretly hoping for both a son with Isaiah's strength and integrity, a daughter with Faith's compassion and healing touch. By early summer, their proper house was taking shape beside the cabin. Isaiah had hired men from nearby settlements to help with the construction, paying them in cattle and Faith's medical services. The new home would have 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen with a proper stove, and a separate room where Faith could prepare her medicines and see patients. "It's more than I ever dreamed of having," Faith said one evening as they stood together looking at the half-built structure, her back resting against Isaiah's chest, his arms encircling her and their child. "It's just the beginning," he promised, his breath warm against her ear. "Wait until you see what I have planned for the garden, and the barn will be next, larger than the temporary shelter we have now." Faith turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his face. The months of outdoor work had deepened his tan, and lines had formed at the corners of his eyes from squinting in the sun. To Faith, he had never been more handsome. "I don't need grand houses or barns," she said softly. "Just you, our child, in this land, that's all the heaven I require." Isaiah's eyes darkened with emotion. "And yet you deserve so much more." He lowered his head to kiss her, his lips finding her birthmark first as they always did, before claiming her mouth in a tender caress that spoke of his enduring devotion. The baby arrived in late August, during a summer thunderstorm that sent sheets of rain lashing against the cabin windows. Faith's labor had begun at dawn, and by midday she was gripping Isaiah's hand with each powerful contraction. He had sent for the midwife from a nearby settlement, but the woman had not yet arrived. "She won't make it in time," Faith gasped, sweat dampening her hair. "You'll have to help me, Isaiah." Though fear flickered in his eyes, Isaiah nodded resolutely. "Tell me what to do." Drawing on her medical knowledge and the births she had attended, Faith guided him through the preparations: clean cloths boiled in water, the knife sterilized in alcohol, the bed arranged for delivery. Between contractions, she gave calm instructions, her healer's training overcoming her own pain and apprehension. As the storm reached its peak, so did Faith's labor. With a final, tremendous effort and Isaiah's steady support, she brought their child into the world, a daughter with a shock of dark hair and strong lungs that announced her arrival with a lusty cry. "A girl," Isaiah said in wonder as he carefully wrapped the infant in a clean cloth. "Faith, she's perfect." Tears streamed down Faith's face as Isaiah placed their daughter in her arms. "She's beautiful," she whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, examining the perfect little face. "And look, Isaiah, her skin is clear, no birthmark." Isaiah sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Faith's shoulders and the other hand gently touching their daughter's cheek. "I would have loved her just as much either way," he said firmly, "just as I love you." Faith looked up at him, her heart so full of love it felt it might burst from her chest. "I know you would have. That's why I love you so much." They named her hope, a symbol of all they had found together and all they dreamed for the future. When the midwife finally arrived, soaked from the storm and apologetic for her delay, she found the new family resting peacefully together, the birth already successfully completed. "Well," the older woman said, impressed after examining both mother and baby, "seems like you didn't need me after all. Fine work, Mr. Ironwood." "It was all Faith," Isaiah said proudly. "She knew exactly what to do." The midwife nodded approvingly. "Mark of a true healer, that is, keeping her head even during her own birthing." She touched Faith's shoulder. "You've got a gift, Mrs. Ironwood. This valley's blessed to have you." As autumn painted the surrounding forests in brilliant hues of red and gold, life settled into a new pattern centered around baby Hope. The house was completed just in time, and they moved in before the first frost, leaving the cabin to serve as Faith's treatment room. Hope thrived under her parents' devoted care, growing plumper by the day, her dark eyes so like her father's, taking in the world with bright curiosity. Faith often carried her in a sling while attending to patients or working in her garden, explaining the properties of each plant as if the infant could understand every word. Isaiah expanded their herd and hired 2 young men to help with the ranch work, allowing him more time with his family. In the evenings, he would sit by the fire with Hope cradled against his chest, telling her stories of brave cowboys and wise healers, of lands far away and adventures yet to come. Faith would watch them, her heart swelling with love for this man who had seen beyond her birthmark to the woman beneath. Word of Faith's successful midwifery with her own child spread, and soon expectant mothers began to seek her assistance. By the time Hope celebrated her first birthday, a joyous gathering that included neighbors from miles around Faith had helped deliver 5 healthy babies, and had established herself as the most respected healer in the region. "You've built quite a practice," Isaiah observed one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of amber and rose. Hope slept peacefully in Faith's arms, her little face relaxed in innocent slumber. "We've built a good life," Faith corrected, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Better than I ever imagined possible." Isaiah turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Any regrets about leaving Willits, coming to this wilderness with a man you barely knew?" Faith shook her head without hesitation. "Not one. This is where I was meant to be." She shifted Hope to one arm and reached up with her free hand to touch her birthmark. "You were right, this wasn't the devil's touch after all." "Heaven sent," Isaiah murmured, covering her hand with his own, "leading us both home." As darkness settled over their valley and the first stars appeared in the clear night sky, Faith thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment, from a feared outsider to a respected healer, from a lonely woman to a beloved wife and mother. The birthmark that had once caused her so much pain had ultimately led her to Isaiah, to Hope, to this land that had embraced them all. "Heaven sent," she agreed softly, and turned her face to receive her husband's kiss, gentle and reverent against the crimson mark that had become a symbol not of shame but of their extraordinary love. 10 years passed, bringing changes to the valley and the Ironwood family. The small ranch had grown into a prosperous operation, with a dozen men working the expanded herds. The house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family Hope, now a spirited 10-year-old with her father's dark eyes and her mother's healing instincts, had been joined by 8-year-old twins, Samuel and Joseph, both with their father's height and love of the outdoors. And then there was 3-year-old Grace, born during a winter blizzard with a small crimson birthmark on her right cheek, not as pronounced as Faith's, but unmistakable nonetheless. "She's perfect," Isaiah had declared the moment he saw the mark, kissing the tiny red stain with the same tenderness he always showed Faith's. Another heaven-sent blessing. Faith had wept with relief and gratitude, knowing that her youngest daughter would grow up never doubting her beauty or worth. Isaiah had made certain of that from the first moment, proudly carrying the infant around for all to admire, the birthmark displayed rather than hidden. A small settlement had sprung up nearby, drawn by the fertile land and the presence of Faith's healing skills. They called it Ironwood Crossing, and though it was little more than a general store, a blacksmith, and a handful of homes clustered around a crossroads, it provided community and convenience for the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. Faith's reputation had grown far beyond the valley. Twice yearly, she traveled to San Francisco to study with doctors there, bringing back new medical knowledge to combine with her traditional remedies. Isaiah had built her a proper clinic adjacent to their home, with a small room where patients from distant areas could stay overnight if necessary. On this particular autumn day, the 15th anniversary of their arrival in the valley, Isaiah found Faith in her garden, harvesting the last of the season's herbs before frost could claim them. Grace played nearby, singing to herself as she arranged pebbles in careful patterns. "There are my beautiful girls," Isaiah called, striding toward them. At 45, his dark hair was now threaded with silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he moved with the same powerful grace that had first captured Faith's attention so many years before. Grace squealed with delight and ran to him on sturdy legs. "Papa, I found a special rock." Isaiah swept her up, settling her on his hip with practiced ease. "Did you now? Let's see this treasure." As Grace solemnly displayed an ordinary gray stone with a streak of quartz running through it, Faith watched them with a heart full of love. The years had been kind, bringing far more joy than sorrow. Hope was already showing remarkable skill with herbs and bandages, often assisting Faith with simpler cases. The twins had their father's way with horses and cattle, and little Grace, well, she was simply a force of nature, curious about everything and afraid of nothing. "It's a magic rock," Grace explained seriously. "See the white line? That's like Mama's special mark and mine." Isaiah examined the stone with exaggerated care. "You're right, darlin', it is special just like you and your mama." He looked over at Faith, his eyes soft with love. "The most special women in the world, marked by heaven itself." Grace nodded, satisfied with this assessment, then wriggled to be put down so she could continue her important work of stone arrangement. Isaiah crossed to where Faith knelt among the herbs, offering his hand to help her stand. 15 years today," he said quietly, pulling her into his arms. Faith leaned into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and horses, and the soap she made from lye and lavender. "The best 15 years imaginable. Do you ever think about Willits?" Isaiah asked, his chin resting on the top of her head. "About how they treated you?" Faith considered the question. She rarely thought of her old home now, her days too full of family and patience and the life they'd built together. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with anger anymore, just gratitude that we found each other, that we made this life instead." Isaiah tilted her face up, his thumb tracing the birthmark that had faded only slightly over the years. "Heaven sent," he murmured, the familiar words a benediction between them. "Heaven sent," Faith agreed, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. From across the garden, Grace called out, "Mama, Papa, look what I made." They turned together to see their youngest daughter standing proudly beside a circular arrangement of stones, with the quartz-streaked rock placed prominently in the center. "It's our family," she explained as they approached. "The big rocks are you and Papa, and the medium ones are Hope and the boys, and the little one is me." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Faith said, kneeling beside her daughter. "And what's this special one in the middle?" Grace touched the quartz-lined stone reverently. "That's our mark. The one that makes us special." Faith's eyes met Isaiah's over their daughter's head, and in that moment, the full circle of their journey was complete. What had once been the devil's touch, a source of shame and isolation, had truly become heaven-sent, a blessing that had led Faith to love, to family, to acceptance, and finally to passing that same gift to her daughter. Isaiah knelt on Grace's other side, his arm reaching around both his marked girls. "That's exactly right, little one. It's what makes you and your mama the most precious treasures in all the world." As the autumn sun warmed their faces and the scent of herbs filled the air, Faith looked around at the home they had built, the valley that had embraced them, and the family that had grown from their love. The birthmark that had once defined her suffering now marked the path to everything she cherished truly heaven sent. Just as Isaiah had declared that day at the harvest celebration when he had first kissed her marked cheek and changed her life forever. Heaven sent, Faith whispered, and knew it was nothing but the simple truth.